Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. The new AI model released by OpenAI would certainly pass the most rigorous interpretation of Alan Turing's famous Turing test. And as I'm sure most of us have heard many times by now, the Turing test was where Turing proposed that a true test of whether a computer system had achieved a human level of intelligence would be when you could fool a human into thinking it was having a conversation with another human. He proposed that he do that in two separate rooms and they'd be connected. Now we do it through a browser. In reality, many people believe this has already been achieved. But if you didn't already, go back and see the video demo from OpenAI's 4.0 release. In that model that they're calling Chat 4.0, which I sincerely hope is a tribute to the old TV show Hawaii 5.0, but whatever, that model can not only read, but it can see and hear. It can pick up the emotion on faces and voices and respond emotionally. In too many other ways to mention, it could fool almost anyone. Now, there are a lot of positive things that can be done with a tool like this, but there's also lots of negative and dangerous things. When AIs can create content that humans can't detect, how will we protect ourselves? What will we do? Now, the idea of deep fakes and how they can be used in corporate consumer fraud has created a panic. But in reality, it's only part of a bigger issue. On the text side, it's already a huge problem. Some experts say that 10% of internet content could already be AI generated. That may be generous, that may be low. I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the point. And there are more than 200 books listed on Amazon that claim an AI author. And there are also dozens of courses you can take to write books with AI. So how many are there actually? Nobody knows. A major sci-fi magazine had to close its online submission portal after it got so many AI-generated submissions that it buried the editors and made it nearly impossible to find submissions from human authors. On the visual side, Getty Images and Shutterstock, these are two of the major sources of commercial images for all kinds of publications. They have banned AI images. YouTube will demand that AI videos be identified at the end of this year, but I can say as a minor YouTube addict, it's already a huge problem on YouTube. There are an enormous number of AI-generated videos, most of them bad. And in what might be the ultimate irony, in January, a top AI conference banned AI-generated papers. But will bans, voluntary or even enforced, will they work? Will labeling work? My guest today is Madeleine Lambert. She's the director of marketing and sales from a company called Originality.ai. She's part of this company that has worked in this arena for some time. The company has specialized in identifying AI-generated content. Welcome, Madeleine.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You and your company have been in this area a long time, or in AI times, a long time. How did you
Yeah.
get engaged in the area of detecting AI-generated content?
Yes. To backtrack a little bit, my roots started with a content marketing agency. So myself and the founder of Originality worked from 2016 until 2022 in content marketing business. Clients would come to us to create content for their online property, whether it's a website or a blog portion of their website or a landing page copy. They would come to us to create that. And so content validation for us was the trickiest part of that business. Clients always wanted to know whether their content was considered good quality. That was of course, they paid for it, right? They paid a pretty penny for it. It was not cheap, like $5 Fiverr articles. It was premium level content, and it was well within their rights to have some sort of qualitative data to understand whether their content was good enough to rank on search engines. So that was already the trickiest part of our business. And so we used lots of tools like Copyscape to make sure that the content was not plagiarized, and then other sort of content optimization tools to make sure that the content was optimized in order to rank on search engines. And so those were the data points that clients liked to see to make sure that things were good quality. And so once we saw tools like Jasper AI, for example, that were using GPT-3 at that point come out, and they were rolling things out. They were actually asking us to beta test it, and we used it extensively. And we saw how good it was, and we saw how powerful it could be. And we saw, even in such a like short period of time, we saw how much it improved so drastically quickly. And so we decided that that generative AI was going to disrupt the industry so drastically, so quickly, that we decided to exit that business and get in front of the problem in a different way by creating Originality, which is meant to sit within your editorial system as a publisher and make sure that's hitting that your content is hitting those editorial guidelines and not not AI generated, or at least identifying AI generated content before it gets published.
And you mentioned that Jasper had been around for a long time. A lot of people have been using this. Did I get it right? Is it a big problem in terms of the amount of content that is generated?
So to backtrack a little bit, Jasper was a new tool on the market, but it was using GPT-3 technology. And so we saw quite a few of those tools being rolled out during that time in 2021, between 2020, 2021, and they were all in the form of paid tools. And yeah, their output was incredible. And it was like the first sort of exposure that we'd seen to commercially available generative AI. And so no one obviously could have predicted that OpenAI would have come out with something as powerful and accessible as ChatGPT in such a short period of time. But yeah, so those original paid tools such as Jasper were our first exposure to it.
Well, I guess I'm egotistical enough, or maybe it's just my failed attempt at a literary degree in an earlier time. I think I'm able to spot a lot of AI generated content given enough time. And I myself as a CIO did reviews of content for people, mostly in terms of making sure it was adequate or good enough for to be published. But linguistics was a fascination for me. And I discovered that AI had patterns. Did you spot those early in the game as well?
Early in the game, for sure. And that's what I mean by things progressed and improved so quickly that, yeah, at the beginning, you could totally tell what was AI generated and what was human generated. And there were definitely some very consistent patterns within generative AI outputs, right? But now it's improved so quickly, and they've just had so much more data to chew on that it's becoming increasingly difficult. And there have been lots of studies that have been recently that have showed that actually humans can't tell with a naked eye what is AI generated and what is human generated in most cases.
The first ones I couldn't tell the difference on
Which
standard marketing, copy,
Mhm.
invitations, all of that sort of the thing you expect the old copywriter to do.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is that stuff already was formulaic.
And
And as
pretty
a matter of fact, you
generic, and yes.
violated the formula at your own risk. They did it because it worked. So
Right.
that one, I had trouble with those.
Yeah.
But the rest, I think you could spot the differences until recently.
Until recently, there's still we study AI outputs all the time, and there are still certain things that would flag it for me, but it's becoming less and less frequent, and AI is getting smarter and swapping those words out. There are, like, some distinct, like, weird word usage that, like, I would never use in a sentence that I usually triggers some sort of, like, flag for me, but again,
Yeah,
it's
and you
yeah,
can't prompt them out in some of them. In OpenAI, you literally can't. That
yeah,
superlative entry that it does
mhm,
in an amazing or in a enormous, that's so much part of copy that's out there that you even when you try and prevent it in the prompt, you can't get rid of it.
or, like, titles that say, like, "Unveiling this, that, the other thing,"
Yep.
and so when I get an email that subject line is "Unveiling," so I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is definitely generated by AI."
But that's OpenAI. Claude AI from Anthropic is a
Ooh,
totally different story.
yeah,
It can write prose, which is virtually indistinguishable from human text now. As a matter of fact, it's the favored tool for authors.
Yeah, it's a very powerful tool, and we've actually just our latest model for originality, we got it to detect code, which is a big
Really?
thing for us. Yes.
I'd ask you, but you probably have to kill me if you told me how, right?
The same way that we train it in the first several iterations, right? You just have a
Okay,
massive
but
data
without
set.
giving your
Yep.
secret away,
Okay.
how do you
Sorry.
do this? How do you train it to find this in virtually indistinguishable copy?
So it's like a science around it, right? It's data science. It's you feed it enough of Claude output and you feed it enough human validated output, and then it does its thing and it can distinguish the very subtle differences.
Interesting. That's
Mhm.
actually turning itself against itself because it creates from patterns in what it finds in text, and you're saying the patterns that it creates leaves a trace.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So what's the problem with AI generated content? I understand, and we went through the deep fake stuff. That's the stuff that gets everybody, and I get it, for consumer fraud and all those sorts of things. What's the problem with AI generated content? Who cares?
Yeah, so great question. Some people don't care. Some people care. Google definitely cares. And if you care about your site ranking well on search engines, you should pay attention to the amount of AI generated content that you're publishing on your site for sure.
You say Google cares. They say they don't. Do you
Mhm.
think Google is fibbing to us?
Oh, that would be a big claim, but I would say that the data shows quite clearly that AI generated content is being punished by Google.
And you watch the releases that it does. And I know there was a big fufura around the last release where people were talking
Mhm,
about some stuff. But that happens every time Google is a major change to the algorithm. Sites
mhm.
drop off and people panic. Did that
Yeah.
happen recently?
Yes, in March 2024. So there were 2 major updates within the last sort of calendar year. There's one in September, which was the helpful content update, and then there was one in March, which was the AI spam update. And so it's a really gray area as to what constitutes as AI spam. Is it just like AI ads? Is it just purely AI generated content that's being passed off as human? Like, what is AI spam? And it's something that Google hasn't really defined or put a lot of effort into clearly dating guidelines for people, but they've just de-indexed a massive number of sites, especially affiliate websites whose whole end game is content, right? And so they've been creating content for the last year or so, probably using generative AI to help them. And that industry has just been absolutely not abolished, but I'd say they've been hurt very badly. And yeah, when I mean like we're following the data, it's the writings on the wall. It's very clear that Google has a stance against AI.
Yeah. And it's endemic in the white paper industry. There have already been sites for lead generation that are just full of white papers. And those at one point were created by fairly cheap writers. Most of cranking out stuff, some of it questionable content, some of it okay. But now that the genie's out of the bottle, there must be an amazing amount of white papers out there that are created by AI generated tools.
Yeah, the proliferation of it on search engines, all of search engines is astonishing. And Google is having some very serious challenges in keeping it at bay. And so there's update and algorithm update have been an attempt to keep it at bay.
The problem we have, though, when it gets to technical issues, and just bringing it back to my audience, and which is largely a technology audience, is that if you use AI to create documents for people who use this stuff for technology, who need to count on the content, you have that awful thing of what are called hallucinations, which is really just errors that are hard to spot. But you have those hallucinations that can infiltrate the text and no one spots them. Is that a problem that you think is out there right now?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the content validation problem that we have with this stuff. And we see it across so many different industries. We work with book publishers, we work with content marketers, we work with, yeah, tons of different industries. And for example, the book publishing industry is facing huge challenges with this because you have big platforms like the Amazon Kindle publishing, which is a great platform for self-publishers. But you have an influx of AI generated books that are being published every day. And then you have, for example, there's a perfect example. There was a mushroom cookbook that was published on Amazon, and after it had been like flagged as potentially AI generated, despite the fact that it was attributed to somebody who claimed that they had a PhD in mycology, which is another problem with AI is the fake authorship and the fraudulent accreditation. And so this mushroom cookbook had been published and people were purchasing it. And upon further study of this book, it was found that it was giving really dangerous advice. And like mushrooms are not things, cooking with mushrooms is not something that it's not something that you want to give factual errors about that can lead to real societal harm and can really impact people's health, right? And so when you don't have a method at safeguarding the information that's being published as a self-published piece of content, it can lead to real societal issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's the solution to this? Or is there one?
I think honestly the genie is out of the bottle at this point. I think that generative AI has been and don't get me wrong, like we're not anti-AI. I think that there's lots of amazing use cases for generative AI. We think that there should be a method at which AI generated content must be disclosed. I think that companies need to implement clear use policies quicker than they have, and just to promote that sort of transparency and ethical usage of generative AI.
And you're talking about a clear use policy. Now,
Yeah.
it's well known that many people are bringing AI tools to work regardless of what their employers think.
Yeah.
Do you mean a policy that will dictate how those tools should be used in the workplace?
Yeah, I think so. How those tools should be used in the workplace. And then from a consumer standpoint, I want to know if I'm buying an AI generated book, and I believe that it should be mandatory for those things to be disclosed because I am much more likely to A, not buy an AI generated book, and B, if I know that it's AI generated, then I'm going to be much more wary of the of its credibility in terms of the content that I'm consuming. So I think that
Yeah.
consumers have the right to know, and I think that businesses have the responsibility to enforce that.
And where do you go in the future with your tool? You obviously the text business. Will you get into the
Yeah.
visual and audio uh, content as well?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a totally different beast. Like, I'm not on the business development side, but I think that's a totally different beast. There are a number of really great tools out there that do the audio and do the image detection, but yeah, that's a totally different beast, and our wheelhouse is content, and so we're just gonna double down our efforts on that and build out tools that are useful to publishers and people who are making content for the web.
So companies need to build their own toolkit of the tools that they have a great policy. Anything else they should do?
I think that we need and I could maybe this is like a utopia or yeah, maybe
Go for it. Utopia is not that bad
a
sometimes.
utopia. But I think that people just need to get real about the like we have half of the global population that's facing an election in some way, shape, or form this year. And I think that we just need to get real about the dangers of AI, especially when we have such critical political things coming up. So I think that we need to get real about the dangers of it. And I think that people need to start being forced to use it a little bit more ethically than we have been over the last couple of years. We just, in terms of the content that we see being put through our tool, we know that generative AI is being used in ways that people state it's not. And so I think that we need to just get a little bit more honest and a little bit more real about the powers of generative AI.
Do you know what I wish people would do? I wish we'd stop talking about teaching coding in schools, which will be an absolutely useless skill in 5 years. And I
Yeah.
wish we'd start talking about critical thinking. That's my utopian wish. Because
Right.
a bad idea that comes from AI, or a bad idea that comes from a person, or a suspect idea that comes from a person, a suspect idea that comes from AI, can still be detected by humans.
Yeah. And I think that generative AI takes that critical thinking piece out of the creation process of a piece of content. And I think that's the one of the dangers of it. I think that it's just, is it making us smarter? I don't know. When you have students that are adamant that they are submitting human generated content because they've generated this outline with ChatGPT and then filled in the blanks. It's okay. Yeah, you wrote the words, but the outline is the critical thinking piece, and you had a computer do that for you, or you had a large language model do that for you. Is is that really your piece of content if you've just written the filler words between the actual hard work of thinking? Maybe that's just
Hmm.
my view on it, but yeah, it's an interesting time for sure.
I think we'll leave our audience with that. Time to think about this. My guest today has been Madeleine Lambert. She's the Director of Marketing and Sales from Originality.ai, a company that specializes in detection of text-based AI model, or text-based AI fakery, I guess you'd say, on it. Hashtag Trending goes to air 5 days a week with a daily news show. We love your comments. You could reach me at editorial@technewsday.ca, and I'll be back in the news chair on Monday morning.